Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lori Riminik, and I work with the Maharishi Vastu office here in North America. I'd like to introduce Jon Lipman, who is the director for Maharishi Vastu for North America, and also the chief architect. And he will be covering today's webinar topic, which is Maharishi Vastu homes around the world. Okay, are you all ready, Jon?
You bet. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. And so why does it matter that we see what Maharishi Vastu homes look like around the world? Why should we bother doing that? And I think the answer is that these houses have a very profound impact upon the lives of the people who occupy them. And that's why it's worth having a look at them. And so what we have understood from earlier webinars is that the ancient Vedic literature proposes that living in a house built according to this natural law-based architecture technology promote influences for the occupants of good health, of happiness, of family harmony, of success, of growth to enlightenment. Certainly all wonderful things. If this was true, wouldn't we all want to live in a Maharishi Vastu house? And really, these 5 influences are byproducts of what's really going on, which is that this is a technology that reinforces our own unity within nature, that integrate us into nature's intelligence. And it does so in very specific ways, which we have discussed in earlier webinars. And so I'll give you a partial and 1-minute reference to one of the main ways in which this is a real thing. And that is that, as you may remember, the Earth is a sphere which rotates on its axis, and therefore the sun and all of the other celestial influences pass overhead from east to west. And everything on the surface of planet Earth is as it is directly or indirectly because of the influences of the sun and its energy. And so we can say that the sun is the most powerful influence of natural law on life on the surface of this Earth. And so we can say that when we face east, we are facing natural law. And the Vedic literature proposes that when we do face natural law, that we spontaneously align ourselves more with nature's intelligence, and that therefore our life becomes more superfluid and we make better choices and life becomes better. Well, wouldn't that be a nice thing? And what do we do in order for this to happen? Well, we spend almost all of our time in this civilization inside of buildings. And so how we can achieve an Eastern orientation is if the buildings are aligned with the cardinal directions, and therefore all the furniture faces the cardinal directions. And therefore it would be easy to, as I am doing right now and as Lori is doing, to sit facing east for major important tasks like working or studying and sleeping with pillow to the east as examples. But there is much, much more to this, as you've heard, because when we are in a house or other building, it is a kind of intermediary between us and the sun, us and the forces of nature. And we understand from the Vedic literature, therefore, that the building's orientation has a real and very measurable impact upon the quality of life of those lived within the building. This can sound completely illogical and unscientific and improbable. However, it's very easy to measure and has been measured in peer-reviewed, published medical studies, and the findings are as predicted by the Vedic literature. So it's a real thing. So this is the first of the ways in which this is a technology which is based in natural law, which is based in the architecture of planet Earth, of that environment which we inhabit. This is an environmental architecture of the most profound and cosmic form with very wide-reaching influences upon the users of these buildings. And this is really the secret. When I referred to the unity of nature, this gives us a glimpse of what it entails. And so we understand the nourishing influence of the sun, of the rising sun, and we use it in various ways in Maharishi Vastu buildings, as I've described in earlier webinars. And this is very measurable. There has been some fantastic medical and statistical research that has been done, which has helped us to uncode how our brain functions differently according to the direction we are facing, that different key elements of the brain are always monitoring our direction and create different mental functioning based upon that, which helps to explain why people who, for instance, sleep with heads to the north, statistically have, that is pillow to the north, have the worst scores on a mental health exam as predicted by the Vedic literature. And this is also why in a survey that we conducted on all of our clients worldwide whom we had current email addresses for, we have many, many, many hundreds. We had 143 respondents, and they responded that in areas of mental health, physical health, sleep, and degrees of stress, that it was their experience that living in their Maharishi Vastu homes or apartments improved each of those important markers of good fortune by anywhere between 60 and 85%. And in other questions, they also described to us how their family relations, the ability to fulfill their goals, the comfort of the home, and the overall quality of their lives in Vastu had improved somewhere between 78 and 95% since they had moved into their Vastu homes. So this is something which, to a reasonable degree, we get insights into from the fields of medicine and statistical research. And those confirm the large-scale responses by people who live in this technology. And I will tell you that I live in and am speaking to you from a Maharishi Vastu home. And these are all my own experiences. And so it's a very real thing to me that I'm talking to you about. And this is why I am moved to share with you what some Maharishi Vastu homes look like around the world, those that create these influences of promoting good health, happiness, family harmony, success, and growth to enlightenment. So let's have a look now with this introduction at a taste of some of the many, many, many hundreds of Maharishi Vastu homes around the world. I don't know how many there are. I know that where I live alone in Fairfield, Iowa, Maharishi Vedic City, Iowa, and Jefferson County, Iowa. In that small area alone, there are 600 Maharishi Vastu homes and many, many, many hundreds more around the world. And now, with no further ado, we'll look at some of them. First of all, we'll start in Japan. And our first Maharishi Vastu house is a traditional contemporary Japanese house made of wonderfully natural materials, as we can see, traditional stucco and wood on the outside. And on the inside, it is a contemporary house, but it has some details that evoke the traditional architecture of Japan. This is a tokonoma with tatami mats spread out in front of it in a traditional room in the house. And here is a bedroom in the house, furnished and detailed in a very contemporary, traditional Japanese style. We go now from Japan to Thailand, where we see one Maharishi Vastu house. And then we go south to Australia, where we see a wonderful home, which is owned by and occupied by two good friends of mine, who supplied these wonderful photographs, which were taken by Anna Bonchek, and I want to thank her for them. An exterior view, a view of the kitchen and dining room. Such a lovely, contemporary, fresh, bright home. and a view of the living room. I was told last time that there's a bit of a lag between when the slides come on and when you hear me talking about a slide. And so I'm going to try to let the slide advance and not say anything about it for a couple of seconds. This is a construction photo of a house in Australia. And what are these wall piers that we are seeing? If you look closely, they have a kind of marbled brown texture on them. That is because they are pressed earth. They are simply the earth from the site, which has sufficient clay in them that they are self-supporting and maintain their integrity. So this house is the embodiment of one of the elements of Maharishi Vastu, which is ideally we build of natural and non-toxic materials. And what could be a more natural material than earth? And here is the finished house, and we can actually see dimly the patterns of the earth's striation in the walls on the outside. The climate in Australia is such that as long as you have eaves, a high mass, high density exterior wall such as this provides all of the buffer that is needed to keep a house comfortable year round. And here's a close-up photograph of the exterior of this lovely house. Another house in Australia, quite a grand house, and a fairly conventional kind of colonial style house, but of course built according to the ancient and eternal principles of Maharishi Vastu architecture. Here, on the other hand, is another house in Australia, which looks like it was built maybe in the 1890s, because this is exactly the style of worker housing that was built very widely across Australia around the turn of the prior century. It's a kind of Victorian bungalow with a front veranda and with Victorian detailing on the columns that support the roof of the veranda. Anyone who's been to Australia has seen hundreds of houses that look kind of like this. But this is a new house built according to the principles of Maharishi Vastu. But not all Maharishi Vastu homes are traditional in their style. This is another one in Australia, which is extremely contemporary in its form and detailing and colors. Here is an interior of it, light, bright, and full of sunlight everywhere, and a contemporary feeling. Here's the kitchen of this house. And here is a shot on the second floor down a hallway. And now we will proceed from Australia to New Zealand. There are quite a few, well over 100 Maharishi Vastu houses in Australia, although I've only shown you about 3 and 4. And there are also, I think, about 25 Maharishi Vastu houses in Japan, even though I only showed you 1. And there are quite a few Maharishi Vastu buildings in Thailand. In fact, there's an entire school, even though I just gave you a taste by showing you 1 house. Similarly, in New Zealand, there are quite a few, but we're just going to look at a couple. This is a 1-story contemporary house. It, like the house that, one of the houses that we saw in Australia, is also made of rammed earth construction. And here we see a construction photo before the walls have been finished and the roof has been put on, in which we can see the rammed earth. Here is the smallest Maharishi Vastu house in New Zealand, but it has perhaps the best view outside of its windows, really quite stunning. And it's a tiny house, which is off the grid. We see photovoltaic electric panels on the right, and we see a cistern for rainwater catchment behind the PV panels on the right. I think this photo was taken before it was quite completed. There isn't a full Maharishi Vastu fence around it. But it's lovely to see tiny houses which serve a segment of the population today, which is growing. And a little later in this webinar, we're going to look at several more Maharishi Vastu tiny houses. We'll go now from New Zealand to India. We're going to look at just one house, even though there are many, many, many Maharishi Vastu structures in India. But this is one I have a special fondness for because I designed it. It's a large house outside of Mumbai. It's a weekend house for a couple there. And this is a view from the house out through a patio to the swimming pool. Here is a view on the left of the center of the house, what we call the Brahmastan. And at the first floor and on the right, we see the center of the house, the Brahmastan, viewed from the second floor. The house is full of light and it has a contemporary Indian style to it. It also has a pavilion just outside of the Vastu fence, which we see in this slide. When it is hot, but there are breezes, then they conduct some of their family living in this pavilion and enjoy the comfort of the surroundings. We'll go now to two countries in the Middle East where we'll see a few of the Maharishi Vastu houses in that part of the world. First of all, in Israel, there is a meditator community in the north of Israel, which I had the great honor of master planning when I was a very, very young architect in, I think, 1979. And it has since grown up to be a large, thriving community. And there are a number of Maharishi Vastu houses built there. This is, I think, the first one. And this is, I think, the second. And in Turkey, there are a number of Maharishi Vastu buildings, but this is a new house and a very handsome one in a conventional contemporary Turkish style. We'll proceed north from Turkey to Eastern Europe and Russia. And first of all, in Russia, we see a photograph of a house which is built in a very traditional Russian manner of construction, which is, as we can see in the construction photo in the upper right, of solid wood, of logs that have been trimmed on their sides so that they become square or rectangular. And so it's a log house, but it looks as though it's got wood siding. Sadly, this photograph was taken while there was still a construction protection fence around it, and so we don't see it quite down to the ground. But it is in a style that is traditional to Russia, which is the home of vast, vast forests and therefore has a lively traditional method of building houses out of solid logs, which is something that we very much endorse in Maharishi Vastu because we endorse building of natural materials as much as is feasible. And here's another house in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, which is also made of different natural materials. In this case, the walls, as you can see, are of stone. They seem to be perhaps of limestone. And the roof, although you can see only the very eave of it, is a traditional thatched roof. So this is a very, very natural small house. Here's a house in Poland, which is in the French Second Empire style. Of course, there was quite a bit of influence from France in the late 19th century in both Poland and other parts of Eastern Europe and Russia. So this is not a surprising style in which a house is built today in Poland, as this was. And Romania, we see also a house which is built using traditional Romanian technologies of wood, and in this case, not actually stone, I think it's concrete block, but stuccoed in a traditional way, with clay tiles, a traditional roofing that has been used since the time of the Romans. A lovely traditional Romanian Maharishi Vastu home. And a house in Hungary with a very steep roof and with a glorious skylight at its peak that would flood the center of the house with natural light. And it looks like this also may be a solid wood walled house. Another house in Hungary in a fairly conventional, traditional style. We move from Eastern Europe now to Western Europe. There are a number of Maharishi Vastu houses in Denmark. I think we're only showing one or two. This is a very small house, almost a tiny house. And this is another, both with lovely wood cladding, which is so common in Scandinavia. We have quite a few Maharishi Vastu houses in Finland, in part because one of our prime Maharishi Vastu architects, Wojtek Skalski, is a citizen of Finland, and he has lived there on and off for quite a few years. And so he has helped quite a few clients in Finland, as well as elsewhere in Eastern Europe. He probably was the architect for all of the Eastern European houses that we've just seen. Wojtek has done a wonderful job. Here is a tiny Maharishi Vastu house of logs that Wojtek designed also in Finland. And here, an interesting house. This is one that Wojtek designed for himself. We see a winter view and a small summer view. And there's an interesting story about this house, which is that he finished it just in time to allow it to be in a house tour. And there were 10 or 20 houses on this tour in this neighborhood that had each been recently built. But by far the largest number of people who viewed the house during the tour, which we see in this photograph with a long line of people waiting to see it, by far the largest number of people who went on the tour went to see Wojtek's house. And they loved the house. He got so many compliments, and so many people said, I want to live in this house. And that's perhaps one reason why there are lots of Maharishi Vastu houses designed by Wojtek subsequently in Finland and nearby. And one interior view of the house. Lovely wood house with beautiful detailing. To Switzerland, and one of our smallest, another tiny Maharishi Vastu house. I think this one's not a house. I think it's a studio in the backyard of someone. This is, I think, the first house that we will see also in Switzerland, which is by another Maharishi Vastu architect, Christian Schweitzer. Christian is enormously talented and gifted both as an architect and as an urban designer and as a carpenter. And some of his earlier houses have a very contemporary feeling to them, and we're seeing one now and another. And this is one of my favorites, partly because this house, in this photograph, embodies one element of Maharishi Vastu homes that we don't often see, which is that it is an ideal to live surrounded by the beauties of nature, to live in a garden, in a flower garden, and also with trees that provide fresh fruit and nuts and vegetables so that you can eat completely fresh local food. But in particular, the beauty quality of living in a garden, we understand in Maharishi Vastu to add something very real to us, and that is embodied in this lovely photograph of this house in Switzerland by Christian. Here's another one of his early modernist houses, and it also is a very good example of passive solar design. The side facing us is the south side, and there is an eave that keeps those large south windows shaded most of the day in the summertime, but fully exposed to light in the winter. One more of his houses, very stately house with glorious views. And another of his houses, which is, though very authentic Maharishi Vastu house, is in the style of some traditional Swiss homes with steep roofs such that the heavy snows of Switzerland will not pile up on the roof. We go now to Spain, where we're going to see one or two houses by another Maharishi Vastu architect, Alberto Castaño. And this appears to be a traditional Spanish house. This house looks like it might have been built 400 years ago, of limestone from the area and clay tile and post and beam porch supports. But this is a new house, and it was designed by Alberto according to the system of Maharishi Vastu. Here's another one of Alberto's homes in Spain. Traditional, but not as traditional as the last one. And another house by Alberto, which interestingly, if we see it in an aerial view, is symmetrical about both axes. It's an extremely symmetrical house, as symmetrical as the famous Villa Rotunda by Andreas Palladio. Symmetry is a principle of nature's own architecture, and bilateral symmetry is something that we encourage in Maharishi Vastu houses, but symmetry to this degree is unusual and a delight to look at. Another house by Alberto, and this one is completely off the grid. We can see on the far left and directly behind the house in the center, photovoltaic electric panels, which provide the source of electricity for this house. Another element of Vastu that is not addressed in the ancient Vedic literature, but Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, when he revived and returned this ancient Vedic system to its full authentic practice for complete effectiveness, added to the ancient recommendations that we get our energy directly from the sun. And he said that in the 1980s, when photovoltaic electric power generation was esoteric and extremely expensive. But today it's very easy to do. My own house is also completely off the grid, getting all of its electricity from the sun at a very modest cost. And Alberto did that in this early house, and it is only fitting that in the foreground, we see an entire field of sunflowers, which are tracking the sun across the sky. We're going to look at some houses in the Netherlands now, which are built using an ideal system. It is ideal, called the Master Builder system, because the walls are breathing, that is vapor permeable, self-insulating to a very high degree, and cast in panels so that they can go up very quickly. And also by virtue of being cast, beautiful Vedic ornament can be cast into them so they can be beautiful, even sublime, without the requirement for extensive work by craftspeople on the site, which is prohibitive in many parts of the world today. So this is the first of the Master Builder houses that we're looking at. And here is a detail of another one. One thing in the Master Builder system is that we make use of traditional Vedic ornament, known as, including something known as the Bow of Ram arch, which really connects the house to the sun and its influence. One more. And here is a row of three quite simple but elegant and lovely Maharishi Vastu Master Builder homes. We turn now to Italy, where Licia is one of our beloved Maharishi Vastu architects. And this is the house that she designed for herself and her husband. And from the exterior, it looks like a kind of mix between contemporary and traditional. And when we go inside, and here we go, beautiful, really magisterial detailing throughout. When we go inside, we find that while the palette is of natural materials, almost entirely wood, the feeling is very, very contemporary. Two photographs of the interior, and I would love to see this house. It really looks so wonderful. Licia's done a terrific job. The kitchen and dining area. And also in Italy, another house by Alberto Castagno is a house done in a very, very traditional style. This house looks like it might have been built hundreds of years ago, but it is both inside and out, but it is a contemporary Maharishi Vastu home. I wish my photos were sharper, but we still get a good sense of the house from these photos. Across the English Channel to Great Britain now, where we're going to look at a few houses in the Maharishi Vastu community of Rendlesham, an entire community in Suffolk in the southeast of England, close to the English Channel, that is master planned according to the principles of Maharishi Vastu, creating a real profound influence of coherence, which improves the quality of life of the occupants of this community in many ways. And every house within it, every building is a Maharishi Vastu house. So we'll look at a few in a row in this slide. By the way, the styles of these houses are based very carefully, very accurately upon the historical Georgian styles of houses, kind of Palladian revival of this exact part of England. This is the style in which the traditional houses for hundreds of years in this part of England were built. And the really talented architects responsible for the designs of the houses in Rendlesham did such a good job in creating designs of houses that fit into the historic character of this part of England, that the City Council of Rendlesham announced that any future developers who want to propose to do subdivisions need to look at the Maharishi Vastu village that we're looking at, Maharishi Vedic village, and learn from these houses in order to design houses that the City Council would bless. And here we see a couple more, a detail of one. Really lovely, lovely houses, so sensitively detailed with lots of handcraft using traditional construction craftspeople who are still practicing their craft in this part of England. We're going to leap across the Atlantic, even though we're going to be coming back to Africa next, and we're going to go to South America, where we're going to see one house. It is in Brazil, and it is in the contemporary Brazilian style. And as we know, being near the equator, it is very hot with a lot of sunlight in Brazil. And so this house was carefully designed with exterior solar shades so that they could have lots of glass, but they could keep the direct solar gain of the sun from entering into the house most of the day. And here we see two other exterior photographs of the house. It looks like it even has exterior sliding screens on some walls that can completely screen the windows at the appropriate times of the day. And here it's a bit of an odd photograph. It was taken with a wide angle lens, a fisheye lens. But if you look closely, you can see the heart of the house. And what we find is that at the center of the house, there's a two-story space, which is filled with sunlight and which is planted as a garden. And at the very center of it, in the lower center of this photograph, we see something blue and white. And that is a Maharishi Vedic observatory, which would require a webinar on its own to fully unpack. It is composed in part of tiny replicas of astronomical observatory instruments as have been built around the world throughout history. And because they are used to track our relationship to the sun and some of the other celestial bodies, we understand that this observatory, as it was designed by Maharishi, when we simply gaze upon it, helps to enliven our connection between us and the intelligence that underlies all of the universe, all of the cosmos. Quite a surprising thing to declare, but the experiences that many people have when looking at the Maharishi Vedic observatories give us some insight into the reality of this technology of consciousness. Another photograph from the second floor looking down through that central space towards the interior garden below. And now back across the Atlantic to Africa, a house in Ghana. And I will mention that the houses that we're seeing in Africa are again all designed by Christian Schweitzer. He has specialized in his practice on serving clients in Africa. Here's one beautiful, very stately, traditional house in South Africa. And another. This photograph is taken before the house was quite complete. We see a little bit of construction on the roof of the veranda and no real landscaping yet. And another Maharishi Vastu house, also in South Africa. And finally, one more. All of these in fairly traditional styles. We embrace classicism. We embrace Palladian symmetrical design as something which, in a way, embodies the architecture of human physiology and of other structures in nature. Now back to the New World and up to Canada, where we're going to see a beautiful large house, difficult to photograph because it's on a steep hillside in British Columbia. A wood exterior, but lots of glass to take advantage of the gorgeous drop-dead views from it. Another house in central Canada. This house is, both of these houses are designed by Carmen Quinton, who is another one of our very talented Maharishi Vastu home designers, who has designed quite a few really beautiful houses. She is originally from Canada, and she has designed a large percentage of the homes in Canada, as well as quite a few houses in Fairfield and other parts of the United States. This is another house by Carmen. It's a simple house, but I, as an architect, look at the subtle details on this house, and I find it to be really meticulously designed by someone who has clearly great talent as a designer. And now a small but really charming house in British Columbia. And this is the house for Ruth Ann Taves, who is the Maharishi Vastu consultant for Canada, and her husband. And she's done a pretty darn good job of surrounding her house with flowers, with the beauty of nature. We'll see a construction photo of this house later on. And at this point, I am going to load up another PowerPoint, which is of houses in the United States, because there are so many hundreds of megs of files in this PowerPoint. I couldn't do it all in one PowerPoint, and I had to break it into two. And so before we go on to looking at some houses in the United States, I want to take just a minute and share with you some of the specific experiences that families have had living in Maharishi Vastu homes. I could read for the entire hour quotes from experiences, but I'm just going to read one or two. And I think what I will pick out, let's start with this. This is really quite an expansive experience. I've been living in my house now for about 1.5 years. Here's what I can say. Light and space as prescribed by Maharishi supports my daily bliss. Each room has its own practical function, but is integrated into a wholeness. Unity pervades. What an amazing result. What does or does not hang on the walls is irrelevant compared with what hangs in the air. The house has its own unwavering consciousness. It lives in the transcendent. It is enlightened, even if I am not. Everything becomes super fluid and super functioning when I'm in the house. The feeling of nurturance is so much bigger than my life that it is totally non-disturbing, more like the feeling of living in a lovely planetarium. I feel a peacefulness coming from the deep silence that underlies even the most mundane activity. Cook vegetables, feel the silence. Brush teeth, feel the silence. Even watch TV, feel the silence. I have also experienced that the consciousness of the Vastu stays with me always, providing an ocean-like protection even when I'm thousands of miles away, like an eternal friend whom you only have to think of and you feel a wave of support and happiness. What a beautiful thing. And I'll read, I think, one more experience before we go to the United States. This is someone who wrote 2 weeks after moving into their house, 2 weeks and some later. Whenever I even think of the house, I've been traveling. I have an inner settling, and it is a quiet, blissful feeling. During meditation, if the thought of the house comes, it immediately lends a deep silence, often unbounded to the experience. I generally feel that moving into the Maharishi Vastu home has changed my life. I feel much more grounded in being, much more full and fulfilled, more integrated, and not looking for the transient relative bliss as much. This has exceeded my expectations, far, far exceeded. What a great blessing to be able to enjoy this silence and transcendent experience from our new home. So let us see some more. Let us see Maharishi Vastu homes in the United States. Lori, are we now seeing the slideshow? Are we seeing a slide that says United States? I'm not hearing you, but just
Yes,
nod
here
if
we go.
we are.
Here I am.
Okay,
I
great.
had myself muted.
Yes,
we are seeing the slideshow.
Terrific. So off we go. We're going to start with some mentions, some very grand houses in the US, and then we'll work our way down to smaller houses and end with tiny houses, just to give a range of the scale of houses that can be built using this technology. This is a very grand house on a beautiful mountainous site built in the Scottish Gothic Revival style. And here is a close-up of the entrance to the house. Really magnificently, beautifully, exquisitely detailed. And a shot of one room in the interior of the house. Well, this is not such a large house, so maybe it's out of sequence. It is a house built by a couple who clearly both have a real love for traditional Japanese Sakiya style architecture. We feel the Japanese influences on the outside of the house. But when we go inside, it turns out the couple who live in this house are both artists and artisans, and they have crafted every inch of the interior of this house to be of sublime beauty. Really, it's a magnificent jewel box, a work of art. Another house, which is not so large, and it was for a blended family with 5 or 6 kids. And when they would all come together on weekends to this house, they have a loft, and we are seeing the view from the loft, and the kids would just unroll sleeping bags and sleep on the floor in the loft. This is a large house, very kind of traditional, conventional architectural style, but there are 2 things which are extremely noteworthy about this house. The first is that its designer, Sue Weller, who is a very talented Maharishi Vastu home designer, who's located now in Lexington, Kentucky, designed this house and got it built, both designed and built and furnished in 9 months. And there was a home tour, which was the deadline, which is why it had to be done so quickly. And thousands of people went through it on that home tour and loved it. The other interesting thing about this house is that it's actually wrapped around a courtyard. And this is a photograph taken from the courtyard. Cincinnati is far enough south where this house is that they can use the courtyard quite a bit of the year. Here's another interior of another Maharishi Vastu house. And here's another one of the grand houses, the mansions. This is for a couple who are both very successful physicians. They are Indo-American and they wanted some quality of their Indian heritage to be felt in the house. And so here, as we see the grand entrance, we see statues of two elephants on either side of the entrance according to the traditional Indian custom. It's in California, and in other respects, its detailing is typical of traditional homes in that part of the United States. Here's another house, quite large, but at the same time, it's a kind of arts and crafts cottage, even though it's much too large to call a cottage. But it is detailed throughout in the arts and crafts manner absolutely exquisitely. It is a gem box. It is really a special home. We'll go inside now. And here's the very center of the house, what we refer to as the Brahmastan, filled with light from above. Another view of the center of the house, and we can see some of the beautiful wood detailing surrounding it on the balcony at the second floor. And here, two close-up shots, including the gorgeous handrails at the staircase on the right, and a beautiful kind of artistic installation of light fixtures over the center of the house on the left. Another photograph of the house, of the main living and dining areas of the home. Really a house that if you walk into, you never want to leave. But that's true, paradoxically, of many, many Maharishi Vastu homes, whether they are grand, whether they are beautifully handcrafted like this, or whether they are very small and very simple. There is something about integrating the architecture of the house into the architecture of planet Earth that makes us feel at home, at one with nature, in a very real way, such that it is a very common experience that when people visit these homes, they don't want to leave. This is a really interesting house. It was built for an American couple who, however, are of Scandinavian ancestry, and they very intentionally had built for themselves a house in the style of the famous Danish designer and architect Carl Larsson, well known as an illustrator in the late 19th century. And he was a part of a revival of the Danish Scandinavian arts and crafts movement. And this house really is an essay in Danish and Scandinavian arts and crafts. And everywhere you look, there's something absolutely gorgeous with a lot of wonderful detailing on the walls, including faux painting, just exquisitely executed by the very couple whose house we saw earlier, who I described as great artists and artisans. And here, looking up in the center of the house in the Brahmastan, seeing sunlight flooding the central space, beautiful balustrade at the second floor. And here, a ground level view of the center of the house on the left, and more beautiful details on the right. Really quite a celestial home. Another view of the house with beautiful faux painting on the wall over this doorway. And the kitchen. Wonderful, bright, cheery pastel colors. And the dining area. We're going to look now at a house which is also in a traditional style, but another traditional arts and crafts style. This is in the style of the famous American architect Frank Lloyd Wright's early Prairie period. This was designed, and I had a hand in it, though really the couple were the primary designers of it, because they fell in love with a drawing of a house they found, and it turned out that it was a house, a particular famous house by Wright, and which really lent itself to a Vastu interpretation. And I knew the architect who had restored it, so I arranged with them to drive to Evanston, Illinois, and study the house. And then this is what came of a reconstruction of it, loosely inspired, integrating elements of Maharishi Vastu. And as we go inside, we see that it's Wrightian even also on the interior. This is a dining set, which are reproduction Frank Lloyd Wright chairs, table, and the central space. A bedroom with ceilings designed just as Wright was wont to do. And now we go to the Rocky Mountains, where we are looking at what might be a log cabin, as would be traditionally done in the Rocky Mountains, built of felled, large diameter softwood trees. But we see an awful lot of glass. This is not a traditional log cabin. This is a contemporary house. And it was designed by Victor Raymond, who is also a Maharishi Vastu designer. And he did a really exquisite job with the design of this house. We'll see several interior photos because I love it so much. Post and beam construction on the interior with traditional plaster on the walls. And a view of living area and kitchen beyond. Beautiful views of the Rocky Mountains through the windows, and a couple of details of the house. And this is a very stately house, very classical Palladian revival kind of house. And it is also by Carmen Quinton, who is a very talented designer whom I mentioned earlier. And one interior photograph of this house at the central space, at the core of the house. We're going to see a little bit of work now by one more very talented Maharishi Vastu architect, Michael Chelnoff. This is a house that he designed for a couple who asked for a house that would look as though it was a Victorian house that had been built, looking at this, I would say about 1897. But no, this is a recently built house, a Maharishi Vastu house, but it is built very faithfully in the Victorian style. The interior is gorgeous, full of wood, looks like walnut to my eye, if I can trust what I see in a photograph. Another house, this photo isn't so sharp, sadly, but I wanted to show this house because I want to show you a lovely photo of the center of the house, of the core of the house, which is sharp, which again shows that central core two-story space. This is a house by another talented Maharishi Vastu architect, Peter Mullins. And this house is a courtyard house. It wraps on three sides, and with the entry veranda, even the fourth side around the central core, outdoor corridor, which we see in this photograph. Really lovely and full of light. And I look forward to Peter doing more Maharishi Vastu homes. We're moving now to Central Texas, where we are seeing a house that is kind of in a traditional Texas style. The owners arranged with a company in Mexico to hand carve beautiful stone columns throughout the interior of the house. That's a really special touch in this house, and we see some of them in this photograph. We're going to see now a house that I had the pleasure of designing for a client, a very talented client who wanted something that was a mid-century modernist styled house, contemporary and in that mid-century modern style. One thing which we can't quite make out in this photograph because it's a spring photo is that she really has planted all the land around her house with flowers. In her case, very, very carefully using only indigenous flowers, flowers of this area, plants. And seasonally, this entire hillside in front of the house is ablaze with the colors of flowers. There's a couple of interiors. On the left, the kitchen, on the right, the entry. Two more details of the house, living room and a hallway. And here is a photo of a modest house, which, however, is designed for an artist and quite prominent, successful photographer. And he conceived of this house as a kind of piece of, as an installation, as a piece of art. And the very center of the house has this exquisite installation at the brownstone. And here's a shot of dining, kitchen, and entry. A modest, simple house now, which is, however, really quite stunning, quite lovely inside with bright natural colors. It's a real essay in natural construction. And here's one of the bedrooms for one of the daughters and a bedroom for another one of the daughters. This is a remodeling that I did in a Maharishi Vastu office building in which I turned one story of the building, the top story, into an apartment. The living room, one of the studies. This is another house which is simple in its character, but I would say really exquisitely, traditionally detailed, as we can see in this interior photo. The living room and the kitchen with the dining room beyond, and beautiful views through both rooms' windows. This is one of the largest, maybe the largest Maharishi Vastu houses that we built in the US, also designed by Carmen. And it, in that spirit of building of completely natural materials, is built entirely of solid wood. This is a log house. And in the interior, where it's not actually logs, it is paneled in wood. So you see nothing but wood inside and out. And it feels extraordinary, really wonderful in this house. This is a house that I designed for a couple who asked for a farmhouse, kind of traditional, though kind of large in this case, American Midwestern farmhouse with a large wraparound veranda. And this is, I think, the last house before we show the tiny houses. This is my own home, which I am broadcasting from. And it is contemporary. One thing which is noteworthy is that it is, as I mentioned earlier, completely off the grid. It's powered entirely by photovoltaic electric panels, and the sunflowers or Heliocanthus in the foreground kind of suggest that. We'll move very quickly couple of views of the living room and the dining area. I'm actually seated at the chair in the lower left, in this left photograph right now. Our bedroom. And here's, quickly we'll see some small homes, tiny homes. Here's an interior of this house, charming use of color. And this is a construction photo of Ruth Ann's home that we saw earlier, where we can, before all the beautiful garden went in. This is a really tiny house, which was designed by a son and his father and built by them. 220 square feet, that would be about 200 square meters, including a loft, which we see accessed by a ladder on the top. But it really is, for one person of modest needs, livable, with a full bath and working kitchen. This is a photograph of another tiny house. I'm afraid it's not a sharp photo, but you can see that it has a living roof. It's a winter shot, so it's not really living in this photograph. And we see stucco earth clay exterior. And here is mother and daughter. It's the daughter's house, actually building the house, stacking straw bales, which then get stuccoed to make the finish of the house. Excuse me while I cough. So how can one have a Maharishi Vastu house? The easiest way is to select a design from our portfolio of pre-designs. There is a European portfolio and a US portfolio. This is one of the European portfolio houses by Christian in a very classical design, and another one actually based on one of our US designs, but in the European portfolio. And last, here is a house in the US portfolio. All of these have been built. Construction drawings are typically available, and it makes it very easy to construct a house by simply purchasing a portfolio design. Many people, of course, never expect to build a house in their lifetime. They live in an apartment, or they plan only to buy existing houses. And for this reason, we are constantly working with developers and builders so that the work that they do, building communities, building lots of houses, they are incorporating the principles of Maharishi Vastu architecture so that anyone simply buying a house ends up living in Vastu. And I'm very pleased to announce that this week, America's next Maharishi Vastu community received its approval from the city to proceed. And this is Mandala Village and Resort in Vero Beach, Florida, Central Florida on the East Coast. And it will have, I think, 120 residences from very small to very large, from cottages to townhouses to apartments to large homes, as well as office space, a hotel with a major chain, meditation space, an Ayurvedic health facility, and lots of community amenities. And so you who are interested in simply buying into a Maharishi Vastu community and not having to worry about getting a house built yourself, just reach out to us and we will connect you if you'd like to have maybe a winter home or a retirement home in Vero Beach, Florida. We will connect you with the developers, Richard Bialowski and David Ederer. And now that this project has been approved, we will look forward to having them on a future webinar where they can tell you all about that project. So for more information, our website is maharishivastu.org. You may email us at info@maharishivastu.org. And in the US, you can phone us at 641-472-7570. And I'm looking at the questions now. I see that there was one question, and I know exactly what house it was asking about. Is it too close to a water feature? In that particular project, the pond, which is quite close to it, is directly to the north of the house. And we understand that that influence is completely nourishing. Lori, are there any other questions that have come in?
Yes, there are. Let's see here. There's Ahmet asked, a Turkish Siddha architecture master student in Italy wants to do his master thesis in Vastu architecture, but his professor responded that he needs to provide some scientific support on this subject.
Well, Ahmet should send us an email, and we will send to Ahmet about 10 pages of summaries of the medical and statistical research that has been done today on Maharishi Vastu. There is some additional research which is not in that yet because it hasn't been published yet, but maybe we can also send that paper along, and Ahmet can share these findings with his thesis professor, and that may provide the professor with enough comfort that there is a very good beginning of a scientific basis for understanding how this technology works.
Excellent. Another question came in. Is it allowed to have exposed beams in Vastu design and construction?
It certainly is, yes.
Okay, excellent. And when you were talking about new apartments and cottages available around, the question was, who are the builders and developers for Vastu?
They are the wisest and most enlightened of the developers and builders. That's who they are, because they recognize that being a developer and builder doesn't have to just be a business in which one makes money. It can also be a technology through one's own craft, which brings health and happiness and harmony, family harmony to the lives of one's customers. And that in turn can prove to be very, very good for business. What we have experienced, as we saw in the walkthroughs in home tours, is that if people are contemplating buying a house and they walk through a Maharishi Vastu home, they, in a very significant percentage of the cases, will feel something about that house that they want in their own lives. And so if a builder builds a spec house using these principles, I am certain that they're going to sell more houses. Who the specific builders and developers are, we'd have to devote a long period of time to go through all of them. I won't give you names on the webinar, that doesn't matter anyway. But if the viewer who was interested wants to know if there's a builder or developer in their area, then just reach out to us by sending an email to info@maharishi-vastu.org, and we'll be glad to respond.
Excellent. Now, there's a question that came up before, and because it was such a great answer, and I think that people might find it interesting, is it easy to build a Maharishi Vastu house in a regular neighborhood?
That's a great question. There can be some obstacles to building Vastu on a lot, and I'll mention what a couple of those things are. But the solution is that before you buy the lot, that you contact us at info@maharishi-vastu.org, and we will, as a service, evaluate any lots that you're looking at, and we'll give you some guidelines such that you can purchase a lot that you can be secure that you can build Maharishi Vastu on. A couple of things to watch out for are, if there's a hill to the east, that blocks the nourishing influence of the rising sun, so we would recommend that you keep looking. And if the lot is not very wide, if it's not too much wider than the house, then it's pretty important that the two side boundaries of the lot run along the cardinal directions, because Maharishi Vastu houses, in order to be integrated into the architecture of planet Earth, are aligned with north, south, east, and west. So if your lot is somewhat tight and the house, but it's not aligned with the cardinal directions, and you try to put a house on it that is, it's a problem in geometry. The best lots face due east and second best face due north, but we can work with lots that face the other directions if necessary also. So just reach out to us and we'll give you some guidelines for purchasing a nourishing lot in any community.
Excellent. Question is, solar panels, can they be on the house? Should they be a apart from the house?
They
About
can be on
placement
the
of solar panels in
solar
regard
panels
to.
solar panels can be on a house. There are a couple of precautions that might be wise to consider, which I would go over with you or whomever your Maharishi Vastu consultant is at the time of the design and construction of your house. I myself prefer mounting solar panels close to the ground rather than on the roof if you're in a climate where there's snow and ice, because it means that when there's snow or ice, it's covering the panels and they're not generating electricity. And if it's on the ground, you can clean the panels off and they return to business.
Good practical advice there. I think that's it on the questions, unless anybody else has anything. Let me see if there's anything from the chat. So thank you, Jon, and thank you everyone for attending. We very much enjoy communicating with everyone, and have a marvelous day.